Margaret Thatcher has a lot to answer for. The Falklands War, the poll tax, the riots, the fact that 1 in 4 children end up born into poverty by the time she came out of power, so you may have different feelings on her. My beef with her is that she told me as a 12-year-old girl that I could have it all. And to Heather's point, the truth is, you can't have it all, and I couldn't have it all. The doting husband, the big job, the children, the ponies in the paddock, the great wardrobe, the fabulous hair indeed, the works. Then came Melanie Griffiths in Working Girl, who also showed me that I could really come from the arse end of nowhere, get a job as a secretary, sleep with a fabulous man and become the CEO and have a corner office. Indeed, I was absolutely sold. Let me tell you something, just a little bit about my story, just to start. I did come from the arse end of nowhere. I come from Gravesend, originally in Kent, and if you want a tetanus jab, I can hand them out whenever you'd like. My father ran off with an 18-year-old when I was in my 12, 13 years and sold our house, and I came home one day from school with my brother to find that our house had been repossessed by bailiffs, and my mother, my brother and I had to go and live in a church housing flat until I was 18 years old. I shared a bedroom with my mother. I didn't go on the ski trip. I didn't have a pony, and I didn't have many clothes, to be honest with you. But what I did decide is to get out of this hellhole, I had to absolutely work my butt off. And that is what I did. I became head girl at my school by being incredibly bossy and trying to control everyone into doing a charity fashion show, which seemed to kind of get me the head girl accolade that I so desired. I wasn't particularly academic. I wanted to be a dentist. I wasn't bright enough. And like Heather, if I do raise enough money from selling my business, hopefully to Heather, because I'm a headhunter too, then maybe I'll go and put myself back into training, and I'm serious about that. But just like Tess in the film, I absolutely knew that if I did work hard and I did push myself, and again, this word ambition that will come up, having ambition will definitely hold you in good stead. And I think that's incredibly important. I moved to London when I was 18 years old. I had a flat for £181 a week. I remember writing the cheque. And my first job was working for Theo Paphitis by sheer chance, who went on to become a dragon, but he certainly wasn't a dragon then. I worked in the basement of an office in Harley Street. I wore catsuits to work, and I didn't care. And he did indeed teach me how to negotiate, and I had a wonderful 18 months with him. I then went to work for a man who I won't name, but is second in command there, and he asked me one day if I wore a short skirt because I wanted a pay rise. I'm sure we've all been there. But I then went and worked for the fabulous Fru Hazlitt, who I'm sure some of you will have come across, who's now at ITV, who is a wonderful woman and highly emotional, and some people say she swears too much. I quite like that. And she did say to me, I will drag you out of the gutter. I think she's referring to Gravesend again. And bring some gin and lemon drizzle cake, darling, but we'll absolutely have a ball. She did teach me how to read a balance sheet. She did teach me what it was about to acquire a business. We'd had an attempted MBO when we were there together, and indeed she went on to work at GCAP, and there was some definite private attempts to take that private with Archie Norman and Lazards and various individuals. So she really showed me what it was to run a business, not just work at a business. I then also encountered a lovely man at a creative agency who also told me as a new business director that I was purely hired for aesthetic reasons. I thank you, Mr. Daly. So there is a glass ceiling. There has been a glass ceiling, and for some people it still exists, and I think the shape and the size of the ceiling has just changed and morphed. For me as an individual, the glass ceiling has always been somewhat of a challenge, and certainly a mischievous challenge in a way, rather than a negative one. And actually now, as I come to you as both an entrepreneur, I run my own company, which is called the Lighthouse. We're headhunters for leaders in business, particularly media and advertising. So in headhunting, my job is to find the best in class, and it can be male or female, short or tall, it really doesn't matter to me. But my job for my clients is to find the absolute best that I can. I'm also a mother and a sister and a daughter, so like many of you in the room, I do understand the pressures that builds. You can't have it all. You cannot have everyone as your top priority. My children are now teenagers, believe it or not, and my brother runs a nightclub in Portugal, so we have a very different family, but there we are. But I do understand the pressures, which is why I just wanted to put that up. The census was not shocking to me, I have to be honest with you, but clearly there are issues at hand that we really need to be concerned about. However, there are a growing number, a couple of them actually in the room today, obviously Nicola and indeed Sarah as well. So for me, certainly on the media side of the business, there is a growing number of managing directors and chief execs who are female. There are definitely less chairmen, although Nicola's an exception to that, but I think that the number is growing, and therefore for me that's encouraging. However, there does remain a distinct lack of females at the senior end in particular companies, and for some there are good reasons, in others less so. I'll just pick on The Guardian and Channel 5. The Guardian for a very long time had both a female CEO and chairman very successfully, have also done a hell of a lot for women in business through WACL and other organisations. So I think right now it's purely circumstantial that they don't have those senior women right at the top of the company. However, and I'll say it publicly, I'm sure Mr. Desmond is probably less keen on having a female at the top of his organisation, but I hope something will happen to change that. In my job, I have what we call in our office the Columbo moment, and it's happening more and more. We go and take a brief from an EMEA CEO or a global CEO to go and find someone to run a media owner or a media agency, creative agency. I take all the details, I'm very diligent about doing my homework, and just as my hand is on the door, like in the doctor's surgery, they say, just one last thing, Kathleen, if it could be a woman, that would be great. So the good news is we're being asked every day to find very senior leadership women, and it becomes a greater and greater challenge for me because the truth is there aren't enough of you out there. And I am talking about top leadership level, not just women generally in the workplace. So for me, you are in demand right now. People are asking for you, and I hope they're asking for the right reasons. We are different, and we do need to celebrate that and to understand that as best we possibly can. Our brains are different. Again, there's a whole book written on this, which I've sourced at the bottom there, which is the Inside Her Pretty Little Head, which if you're in marketing, I hope you have read. But the truth of it is that our limbic systems are built differently, our hippocampus is different, we look at the world in a very different way. And, you know, it's about us not being frustrated by the men, but actually being fascinated by them, understand better the differences and why it can be so challenging, but indeed what you could do about that. Again, this could be a whole presentation in itself, so again, maybe to read afterwards. We are wired differently. We have a whole brain perspective. We're less systematic, less about action, more about feelings. We tend to befriend. We're interested in people more than we are things, and we're hardwired to empathise. These may be sweeping statements, but there is something about the wiring of the male and female brain which is different. When asked young children to draw pictures, boys will draw things on the left, girls will draw people. I think there's something in that we have to think about as we go forward. But the truth is, the difference is being recognised as positive. I'm sure I won't be the first to mention quotas today. The Scandinavian businesses and countries are much more in recognition of that. Norway with their 40% quota, which by the way currently stands at 42%, so it has worked. Lord Davis has set a minimum of 25% for us in the country, but it's not a mandatory quota. And do I believe in quotas? I'm not sure. I still believe in having the right person for the job, but I certainly think it gives a focus to what people should be thinking about. It is getting better. The pattern is going up, but if you look at those numbers down the bottom, one female director, 89%, multiple female directors, 50%. So are they putting a woman on the board for having a woman on the board's sake, or do they actually believe in the balance and the difference and the positivity that brings? That's a question for someone far brighter than I. We still have a long way to go, but actually if you look at us in the grand scheme of things, we're not so far behind, but the jump between the Scandinavian countries and us is huge, and there is quite a long way to go. So from a Headhunter with Love, I was asked to give some ideas as to why this may be, certainly when we're looking for women. For me, these are some of the essentials of female leadership, and they're not necessarily PC things to say, but they're the truth from my heart, from what I see being a headhunter for the last 5 years. Ambition. When you started work, did you expect to take on a management or leadership role? Look at the difference between men and women. Our expectations are lower. No, I did not expect to, women far higher. There is something about expectation, and therefore there has to be something in our education system that trains our daughters, our nieces to think about what they really want to do and to set those end goals, if that is what you want for your life. Women are seen to go into management 3 years later than men. This comes from a study that came out last year, the Gender in the Workplace study. So if that's the case already, again, the ambition maybe is lagging behind our male counterparts. Confidence. Again, how best would you describe your own level of personal confidence? Look at the difference between men and women in these charts. So there's something that needs to be done there. We'll talk about imposter syndrome. It's relevant to men and to women, but in my day job, I see this so prevalent when I chase up someone to come and be a CEO or a managing director, let's say, for an agency. The men are very confident about being able to do the job, even if they're only really competent for a majority, but not all of it. If a woman feels that any part of it she's not qualified for, she will discount herself from that role. That's something we need to think about. So when there's a job description, for example, 100% of men will go for the role, only 70% of women will go for the role. And in that interview, the women will focus on the 10% they don't think they can do. Men will simply gloss over it. We need to think about that as well, women. Physical health should not be underestimated. We are not built the same as men. We don't cope with stress the same as men. Our stress response is incredibly different. And if you try and go toe-to-toe physically with a man, then it can be incredibly challenging. So when they're successful, when they are seeking confidence in the workplace, a man is proven will emit testosterone. Ours comes through oxytocin, but it also comes through adrenaline. And those two hormones provide very different things. These are two articles. One actually came out on Saturday in The Guardian talking about, is there too much testosterone? Because actually it creates very, very different things physically in men. For women, however, there is an epidemic of adrenal gland issues for women that are in high stress, high leadership positions, because adrenaline is there to help you with short bursts of energy. It's to lift the car off your dying child. It is not to go to work every day, to go toe-to-toe with your male counterparts, or indeed just to do business as a CEO. So we have to think physically about how we take care of ourselves and how we take care of our female senior leadership women in the business as well. Mental health, again, is a whole new world to go into, but there are some statistics that tell you that women are more likely to have a depressive episode or some kind of a breakdown in their life. Men, quite interestingly, unfortunately, might go the alcoholic route instead, but we tend to suffer on a mental level far greater than men. And pragmatic support, what does that really mean? Having it all, as Heather said, does not mean doing it all, because often that's what we end up doing. Where is the shame in a man having PAs, coaches, housekeepers, drivers, personal trainers, and lots of family support when a woman comes to say, I have a driver, which is currently my personal ambition, Heather, just so you know, then you shouldn't feel guilty about it. And you can't always do the cake bake, and you can't always be at everything. If your ambition is to be a senior woman in the business and to have that as your ultimate goal, for others it's incredibly important, and it's what they should do. And I think our judgment and our preconceived ideas of that are sometimes what holds us all back within organisations. I have to talk about the career terrorists, because not everybody will want children, not everybody can have children, as I'm finding out now I'm age 40 with some of my friends. But it's incredibly important to address this and not just sweep it under the carpet. If we already know that women come into management 3 years later than men, what's the other effects of that? The average age of motherhood in the UK is 29 and a half. If you assume that our industry tends to take graduate level individuals, the number slightly increases to around 31, 32. So just as your male counterparts are coming into a leadership role, you're taking yourself out of the business to go and have a baby. And that, I think, is one of the fundamental reasons why I struggle sometimes to find that managing director level, probably mid-30s, to go and run an agency, because you're probably in the middle of having your children, if children are part of your life plan. And what happens when you have those children are that 42% of them will go and take their full maternity leave, and 9% may even leave the business altogether. 21% will leave the business altogether to go and actually stay with their children. The difference highly with men. Paternity leave for average man is 2 weeks versus our statutory 6, but we normally take maybe 6 months. And only 2% of men actually leave the business to go and care for their children. So there is a huge difference. I'm not going to say disadvantage, because I think it depends on what you want out of life. But I think there's definitely something to be said there. The way that I see it and the way that I talk to my clients about this when we're talking about hiring women and supporting women is everything is in beta right now. We are trying new things. Flexible working, you can come in at 10 and you can go home at 4 to pick up little Johnny, and let's have a bring the kids to work day. I just don't think it's cutting it, if I'm really honest with you. And I say that as a mother myself. Google, I saw a fabulous headline last year saying they're going to open a creche in London. And I thought, finally, one of the big companies is going to open a creche in London. Why hasn't somebody done that before? When I read a bit closer, they're opening a creche for geeks. So even one of the most progressive companies in the world still hasn't got their head round whether or not you might actually bring your child to work. And maybe you may even want to pop down and see your child at lunchtime, but actually you'll give your all the rest of the time that you are there. The continual dilemma is also about guilt. Again, Heather's talked about guilt. We all feel it about leaving our children. We occasionally resent our partner who hasn't had to leave our children. But actually, only 9% of us would actually swap places with a stay-at-home father. So I think we constantly feel conflicted about what we're meant to be versus what we want to be. And I think for those of us that are particularly ambitious but still want to be fabulous mums, and I hope I'm a fabulous mum, but I do work very hard, I think that it's about societal change, and that's going to take quite a long time. I asked a number of coaches last week in preparation for this how long they thought it would be before we absolutely felt that it was a 50-50 situation between mums or dads staying at home, and the average was 3 to 4 generations' time, so certainly probably not in my working lifetime. Of course, we need that change, legislation, passing the baby, educating our daughters, but also rewarding time for success, not just time at your desk. When I was at PhD, which was an amazing agency, and I worked with some amazing individuals, and Tess Alps and Morag Blazy were two of the women that I worked with there. In fact, I shared an office with Morag for a while. And I was going through a relationship breakup at the time. My children were, 5 and 3. It was a long time ago. And I needed to be at home on a Monday. I ran new business, I ran client servicing, I was really front-facing, so it wasn't one of those jobs that you could probably stick me at home on the computer and nobody would have noticed. But to their credit, they allowed me for 6 months to work on Mondays at home, and just for that moment in my life, that hiatus, I needed to be there, and they let that happen. Nobody would have known. I was answering all the emails, I was doing everything I needed to do, but that company allowed me to do it at a time when they weren't particularly allowing other people to do more part-time jobs when they were particularly client-facing. It comes down to trust, it comes down to real understanding, and that really helped me at a time in my career, so I will always thank them for that. Meaningful support. So we talk about when you come back to work, and Heather talked about outsourcing. You know, it's when you first have to hire a nanny or a child carer, you don't know what you're doing, where to look. There's legislation, there's tax planning, there's lots of things that go with that. Can companies, and maybe Rasheen will tell us that P&J are, helping individuals as they come back with nanny agreements and nanny banks if there's an emergency. Often it's time when you most need it. Your daughter's gone and got chicken pox, she can't go to the nursery for 10 days because she could be contagious. How on earth do you deal with that, and what could a company do to help with that? Could they send a nanny to your home and just help you out? Family support and parenting advice for any age, no matter what your setup is at home. Your children at some point will become challenging. Mine are 15 and 13 now, and I am braced and ready. So I think we need to think about what could we supply in that area too. For many, many years, male CEOs have been supplied with PAs and coaches and people to help them with their kind of mental strength. What is it that we need as women? Maybe we should think about that too. I couldn't avoid a Kardashian picture, for the love of me. Have child will travel. I'm just going to put an example up of someone that a few of us in the room will already know, which I think has been quite inspiring. This is Carolyn Everson, and she's the global VP for commercial for Facebook, and she flies around the world literally every week of the year, and if you're following her on Facebook, you'll to see her. She literally lands and takes off within 24 hours all around the world. She also has twin daughters who are 9 years old and a husband. And she was hired by Cheryl at Facebook. And part of the deal was, sometimes I don't want to be away from my children for that long. I don't want to be away from them for 2 weeks. It's just too long. So the deal is that they will pay for and supply a room for her children and again, any support that she has with her. And this is a picture of her children in China, in India, in Australia. She just damn well takes them with her. And she can put them to bed. And a lot of her clients have actually met her children because sometimes they go to the dinner of an evening. And I think that might be a bit more of a revolutionary way of thinking about it, not letting them go home at 4:30. Dealing with the guilt, we all have to do that. It's an individual choice that you have to make. But sometimes you don't have to rise to the cake bake if that's not what you want to do. I've never missed my child's open evening. I've never missed, Nancy's drawings in a gallery. I've never missed Ned when he's doing a chess tournament. But there's probably been the odd cake bake that I haven't gone to. And half the mums at the school don't know who I am. Or if they do know who I am, think, who's that stuck-up cow with the lipstick and the dress on when they've got their jogging bottoms on. But do you know what? I've just had to live with it. It's just what happens. The other thing I want to suggest, I do a little bit of work with Price Waterhouse, and it's very interesting for the women there, particularly if you want to have children or having a conversation around children. Legislation is such that it's very difficult. I mean, clearly in an interview you can't ask someone, are they planning to have a child, but you can take a bit of a guess on it. And equally, I think that if you're an individual that may have had one child, I'm often asked in an interview, if someone's had one child, they're nervous to hire you because you probably will have a second. God willing, you want to, and you can. So that's another unsaid thing that happens. Is there a way that we can think about having more of an honest conversation with people about that? So women at Pricewaterhouse will say to me, they're cognizant that I've just got married and I probably want to have a baby, so they're not putting me on the most interesting projects or the more longer term projects because the chances are that I'm going to go and have a baby. So I'm just being given some of the dross, and it's not fair. And some of that's their top talent as well. Is there a way that we can talk about it openly? In fact, there's someone in the room that I'm going to talk about, but I won't mention who they are. Recently, we tried to headhunt someone for an organisation, and they were very much wanted by the hiring CEO. And this individual had recently got married and shared with me that they actually were trying for a baby right now. And I asked her permission if I could tell that CEO that that was the case, and therefore ask would he still consider hiring her, knowing that for a period of time he would lose her probably in the next 18 months. And the hiring CEO said he would be more than happy to hire her because he wanted that talent so much in his business that he was willing to allow that to happen. Now that for me is forward thinking and bravery, and I have to say I acknowledge that individual higher than I did before. So these are the kinds of things I'd like to see as a headhunter that business consider. I'm also an employer. I employ 4 women. My PA was 24 and suddenly became pregnant unexpectedly when we were only 4 people in the business, and I understand the cost of maternity leave, not just disruption to the business, but the cost to the business too, particularly when it's a small business. But you do get on with it and you do treat them as best you can, and they come back. And that's the thing that's most important to me. So stereotypes are out. You haven't got to be the bitch from hell, but you do have to think about looking after yourself and accept that you are wired differently and what can you do to support that. But think about the confidence, the ambition that you need to show and demonstrate when in an interview to make sure that you get through to that final place. I agree on the hair, by the way. I think it's incredibly important, and I think if you have to spend some money on it, do. We have recently in our organisation hired someone in our operations role who was a hairdresser, and the product of that you see this morning. Thank you.